This video was inspired by a dumb comment. What's good, folks? NERFING here with a new Warframe video, coming at you with a Titania Dex Pixia DPS guide. So let's talk about Dex Pixia, which, let's be honest, is pretty much Titania's only exalted weapon that actually does any real work. Dex Pixia functions as a battery-type secondary weapon. That means instead of reloading it like a normal pistol, it recharges over time. Sounds fancy, but in practice, it also means if you completely drain the battery, you're stuck waiting for it to recharge, and that downtime is awful. Because of that, if you're playing Titania with Dex Pixia, I highly recommend running Arcane Pistolier. On a headshot kill, it gives you 60% chance to gain 102% ammo efficiency on your secondary weapons. What that effectively means is you get a window where your shots don't consume ammo, which completely removes the miserable recharge downtime. And trust me, once you play with Pistolier, going back without it feels painful. Now let's talk about damage scaling, because Dex Pixia behaves a little differently from normal weapons. Ability strength increases Dex Pixia's base damage, and then base damage mods multiply the value afterwards. So you essentially have two base damage layers interacting with each other. Here's a quick example. A base strength Dex Pixia has a 160 total base damage. If your Titania has a 2.82 times strength multiplier, that takes the weapon's base damage to 451. Then apply Hornet Strike, which in this case is 3.2 times base damage. So when we multiply 451 times 3.2, and that gives us 1443.2 total base damage. Pretty straightforward. After that though, it behaves pretty much like any normal pistol when it comes to modding. Crit mods, elemental mods, multi-shot, all the usual suspects apply. The only thing missing, of course, is rivets. How does this Titania build actually work? It's extremely complicated. You activate Razorwing, cast your first ability and turn on your buffs to trigger the Razorwing Blitz augment for the fire rate boost, and then you shoot the bad guys. I know, truly revolutionary gameplay. Now that we've got that established, let's take a look at the Helminth abilities that actually benefit Dex Pixia. And realistically, there are three good options: Roar, Nourish, and Xata's Whisper. Out of the three, Nourish and Xata's Whisper tend to be the most comfortable options in practice. But let's go through them. First, Roar. Roar is a universal damage multiplier. It buffs both abilities and weapons, which makes it excellent for overall scaling. It also allows for status double dipping, meaning certain damage over time effects benefit from the multiplier twice. Simple, effective, hard to go wrong with. Next is Nourish. Nourish adds the viral elemental damage to your attacks. And viral is extremely strong because its status effect increases damage done to health, up to a 4.2 times multiplier at full stacks. So you're not just getting elemental damage, you're also getting one of the strongest damage amplifiers in the game. On top of that, Nourish also provides a global energy multiplier, which makes Titania's energy economy significantly more comfortable. So overall, damage buff, status effect synergy, and better energy sustain. And finally, the complicated one, Xata's Whisper. At first, it looks similar to Toxic Lash, but it actually functions a bit differently. Xata's Whisper scales with ability strength, external modifiers, and your weapon's mods. Strength determines the initial amount of void damage the buff provides. Once applied, your weapon will deal an additional instance of void damage every time it hits, and that additional instance scales off your weapon's mods. So things like base damage, critical multipliers, faction damage, and especially elemental damage multipliers all contribute to the extra void hit. And if you noticed earlier, Roar, Nourish, and Xata's Whisper all interact with each other in these calculations. Now here's the important part. The additional void damage from Xata's Whisper also scales with multi-shot. So every extra pellet your weapon fires will also generate its own void damage instance. More bullets, more void hits. Simple. But the real magic comes from its unique status effect. When Xata's Whisper procs, it creates a void bubble at the point of impact. This bubble does something pretty interesting. If you land a headshot and trigger the bubble, the entire bubble effectively becomes a headshot hitbox. So every subsequent shot that hits the bubble gets redirected to the head. Yes, you basically create a portable headshot magnet. And as a bonus, the bubble also acts as a bullet attractor, meaning it can block incoming enemy fire if you're, of course, standing on the opposite side. So it's doing offense, defense, and hitbox manipulation all at the same time. But this bubble only triggers based off your weapon's status effect. Clearly I meant status chance. There are also some additional interactions. Xata's Whisper can trigger from weapon AoE effects or abilities that inherit weapon buffs. I'm going to skip the ability inheritance part because that rabbit hole gets complicated. Nova. But the AoE interaction is simple. Any persistent or lingering area of effect damage from your weapon can also trigger Xata's bubbles, as long as that effect came from a weapon currently buffed by Xata's Whisper and are counted as weapon damage hits. For example, in a previous video, I showed Saren using Ogress with Nightwatch Napalm, where both Toxic Lash and Xata's Whisper were triggering simultaneously, not from each other. The Void Bubbles procced on the enemy were able to re-trigger Toxic Lash if the enemy shot into the bubble. Xata also interacts with another status effect, Blast. Blast status works a little differently. After a short delay, it deals a portion of its base damage, and at maximum stacks, or when killing an enemy affected by Blast, it triggers a 5-meter explosion. Unfortunately, there are a couple of limitations. The explosion only takes 30% of your total modded base damage, and the Blast status damage does not scale with its own elemental modifier, so adding more heat or cold won't increase the Blast status damage portion. However, increasing heat and cold will still increase the initial hit damage. Unfortunately, Blast just scales in a slightly unintuitive way. Now, why is this important? It's something I'll get to when showcasing the build. So why do people run Blast with Xata's Whisper in the first place? Mostly for AoE clear. Dex Pixia is naturally a single target weapon, and Blast combined with Xata bubbles helps smooth that out by giving you some extra crowd clearing. And to be fair, Warframe enemies have been nerfed so heavily over the years that most of the time you won't even notice you're dealing less damage, because everything else just dies anyway. Also, showcasing Blast in a simulacrum where enemies are just conveniently standing next to each other for a massive chain reaction explosion isn't what happens in an actual mission. There's also an unfortunate interaction. If you deal too much upfront damage, you'll actually bypass the elemental proc entirely. In other words, you one-shot the enemy before the status effect even has a chance to trigger, which means no Blast proc, no AoE explosion. So if you want to see consistent interactions between Xata and Blast, where they keep re-triggering each other, you actually have to nerf yourself. You need to do less damage in order for the mechanic to work consistently, because overkill damage doesn't trigger status effects. Now let's address what might be the dumbest thing you can do when building Titania with Dex Pixia. Running Archon Continuity just so you can mod Toxin and Blast on Dex Pixia, because what you're effectively doing is nerfing your own damage for a small special effect. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up. Status effects and elemental damage are not the same thing. The elemental damage increases your raw hit damage, while the status effect is simply a secondary mechanic that triggers under certain conditions. So if your goal is maximizing damage, confusing the two things can lead to some questionable build choices. Instead of just saying that though, let's actually demonstrate it. Same Helminth ability, same Titania build. The only thing I changed was swapping a duration mod for Archon Continuity, which forced me to compromise my elemental modding on Dex Pixia. But to supplement that, I added more crit damage. Everything else stayed identical. With Toxin and Blast, the highest orange crit was 159k. With Corrosive and Blast, the highest orange crit jumped to 315k. That's a 98% increase, almost double the damage. And keep in mind, these enemies aren't even Grineer, which are ridiculously weak to Corrosive. Because if you ran these tests against Grineer, well, the difference would be ridiculous. Now, hopefully you actually took in all this yapping, because let's actually get down and look at the builds. All right, starting off with the Archon shards. I have 4 yellow Talford shards. The first 2 will give you maximum energy filled when I enter a mission. This is pretty much the preparation mod. I use this with my Thermal Sunder build, but if you don't care too much about this, I would say go for more strength. And the other 2 are effectiveness on energy orbs. This is mostly used with Xata's Whisper, because Nourish, you don't really need this. But if you're going the Nourish route, again, go for more strength. And lastly, I have 1 green Talforge to increase my corrosive stacks to 13. This will reduce the armor ever so slightly to the point where I deal extra damage, but without the needing to fully strip. Because if you do this, it's way better than running Toxin on your weapons to proc Corrosive, because you can just go full Corrosive and increase your overall damage and armor strength easily, comfortably. I already yapped too much. Let's have a look at the mods. The Arcane's simple. Strength and Arcane Pistolier. When you hit 250 kills, deactivate your 4 and reactivate your 4 to take the benefits of the increase in strength. Otherwise, if you don't care too much about this, run anything else. We have Power Drift, Umbral Intensify, Augur Secrets, Blind Rage for our strength increases. These are going to be the comfort picks. If you're going to replace Augur Secrets with Transient Fortitude, you will lose some duration. Replace Augmented with Arcane Energize. Otherwise, we mod it like this. Neurominded here for the increase in duration. Number 1, Xata's doesn't scale with range, so Prime Fulmination is useless if you're doing Blast. I will only have 2 abilities I'll be recasting ever so often. The damage buff, either Xata or Nourish, or Spellbind to give me the status immunity. That's about it. And having a lot of duration here reduces the amount of energy you drain. Have a look right there. With no efficiency mods, my energy per second is at 3.89. If I were to have any other duration mod like Prime Continuity or Archon Continuity, our energy per second goes up to 5. So without modding for any efficiency, I will have 3.89 energy drain per second. And for those who don't know, if you're mid-air, your Razor Wing has a faster cast time animation. And I'm also using the Matter-Eye Focus School, so to give me a larger boost in strength, 2 Void Slings, jump, faster cast speed. If you activate any ability, you will trigger your Razor Wing Blitz Augment here. This will give you the fire rate and flight speed. And you just shoot whatever. I wasn't even hitting headshots there, because if I was hitting headshots, I'll actually be doing more damage. But it doesn't really matter. I was able to trigger my Arcane Pistolier, and among other things. The Dex Pixia build. Enervate for the crit chance. That way I don't have to mod for crit chance on my weapon, and I'll only multiply my critical damage with my companion running Tenacious Bond and Prime Target Cracker. Now notice I don't have Hornet Strike here because I'll be utilizing Galvanized Shot. This is Condition Overload but for guns. This will give me status chance and also some base damage. Lethal Torrent for fire rate, multi-shot, Galvanized for more multi-shot, and here I have Blast and Corrosive. I'm running all 60/60s here because I don't want to have overkill damage. If you have a lot of overkill damage, you will not proc the status effect. However, your Xata shots, your initial hits, will do a lot of damage. So if you go for a lot of raw elemental damage here, it will kill your status spreading. So that's why I went for a full 60/60, and having a decent amount of elemental damage here will also increase how much damage my Xata deals. And building up a lot of strength, Xata's Whisper will also increase in damage alongside your Dex Pixia's damage. Now let's move on to the second iteration of this build if you're doing level cap and you're mostly focused on single target. And this is the Nourish variant. It's literally the same build, but it has Nourish. The main thing that's going to be changing is the Dex Pixia build. I'll just be going for raw elemental damage and crit damage. You can see here I went with Hornet Strike. My base damage is at 13k. We stacked up even more crit chance and crit damage. This will give me a larger bump in the crit chance department. However, if you're not relying too much on getting a head start in the crit department, I highly recommend running the faction damage mod against the faction you're up against. Otherwise, this is what you'll be doing. Merciless Gunflight here will give you punch through and some crit damage. Same thing. See, it's a lot more upfront damage. If you're fighting against Thrax, you can see right there, damage is good. Do your thing, boom, boom, boom. You know, the usual. Companion, just run anything that will give you Tenacious Bond, so it doesn't really matter. Because unfortunately, whenever you're in Pixie mode, you'll lose access to your companion, but you do gain the benefits of everything else. In this case, I'm running a Sentinel here with the Burst Laser Prime. Most importantly, just make sure you have Tenacious Bond and Reinforced Bond for even more fire rate, so you don't have to cast too much of Razor Wing Blitz. It has the Augur Bonds, Creeping Bullseye to get our crit chance over 60%. So as you can see, we have Tenacious Bond and Reinforced Bond here. So fire rate and a bunch of crit damage. That's pretty much it. Those are the builds. Go do some damage. Anyway, folks, that has been it for me. I do have enjoyed and learned something from this video, because if you did, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do it for the description. Thanks for watching. As always, peace. Bye-bye now.